Kelly, this has been a particularly big year in many ways, hasn't it? I mean, it kicked off with the MA, and it's a landmark birthday. Don't have to say which one, but
Everybody knows.
It's a landmark birthday coming up. How many years, though, running your interior design business?
I started the business when I was 16 and a half, and I turned 50 this year, so a long time.
It is a long time. Well done.
Thank you. I'm tired.
I mean, I suppose thinking of particular projects that have been important. I mean, again, are there any that you particularly remember as where you learned a lot yourself?
I think you learn from every project, and you know, people always say, which is your favourite? And it's always the last one I did, because it's sort of in my mind. And I design every project myself still. But I suppose something like British Airways First Class was, you know, stands out in my head because it was so extraordinary to be at BA and going into these hangars and into the planes when they're not, you know, actually up in the air, and they're quite dark and scary. And there I was doing this presentation where the whole thing was all cream and taupe, you know, because I was so like in cuckoo land as to what could be done in a commercial airline. And, you know, I got a standing ovation with my presentation, and then I remember, I think it was Bob Ayling was the head then, and he said, you know, I've just been told that your presentation was in taupe and cream, even though he was in the presentation. He said, but I'm actually colourblind. I thought, oh, great. And he said, but it's totally impractical. We need to have branded colours. So I had to change it all to sort of, you know, boring blue and red. But I remember going into the hangar and going into the first class, you know, loo. And I saw that on the inside was a window, but it had been blocked up. And I said, well, surely this should be taken off. It'd be fantastic to have a pee and have the window open. So I actually put the windows back into the loos on planes, which I feel quite proud about. So it had this thing that when it was on the ground, it sort of went opaque. And when you were up in the air, you could see all the clouds and stuff. But that was a pretty amazing project.
No, absolutely. Did you have are there any houses you remember from childhood which were influential to you, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, my last book I sort of dedicated really in the foreword to my grandmother, who had this extraordinary house in Cape Town, and we used to go back every year, you know, for Christmas. And I just, you know, when I was doing these books, which I've done with Helen, I remember sort of thinking, what were the things that kind of inspired me as a child? But my mother was, you know, and is an amazing woman of style, and our homes were always beautiful. But my grandmother's home just had that essence of home, real home. And I think that, you know, and I'm to blame as well because of my work being in magazines, and it's very stylized when it gets photographed. But the thing that my clients say is that they feel like they've lived there all their lives, but they've only just moved in. It's that feeling that you create a home, which is kind of, in the old days, your home was something that you built over generations, and you bought things to use. And my grandmother had extraordinary china and glass that was today would look so expensive and unique, and yet she used it every day. And it was kind of the smell of the home, you know, when you put your key in the door and you suddenly feel safe, and it was all that kind of thing. So I think it had a big part to play, and also she entertained a lot at home with family and friends, and so I think that had an enormous impact in me growing up.
So when you are yourself designing, can you tell us a bit more about how you set about that? What is the design process for you? Where do you yourself like to begin?
Well, you know, to begin with, I do this thing where I sit down with the client and we go through tear sheets, and they look through my books and tell me what they like, don't like, and then you're looking at the actual plan of a home and working out if you've got all the layouts. If we're building a house, we have to obviously zone it and put it all together. And it's kind of a process of elimination. It's sort of layers and layers of getting to the point where you know what you want. And then once I feel I know exactly what they want, and it doesn't take me very long, then I'm in my design room, crank up the music, and I just design, you know, and that's when I'm most happy.
So you are yourself personally involved with every design that bears your name?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still do all the designing. I have some of my staff do the bathrooms and things. I'll tell them what stones and things and the kind of look of it, and they'll help me with that. Kitchen designs, we always use kitchen companies like Alternative Plans. And basically I do the design, and then it all gets drawn up by these CAD technicians, which are phenomenal. And then we use, you know, like a computer-generated imagery, so it actually looks like a photograph, which is phenomenal. We used to have people actually sketching them and watercoloring, and now you can have it all on a computer. And, you know, at a flick of a switch, you can turn a floor from black to white. So it's phenomenal. So, you know, for me, the presentation is the most important, because that's where you're selling it. And it is kind of scary, because you, as a client, and I do at my own home, you have a vision of what you want it to look like. But when it actually is put in front of you, it's quite shocking, because it's never quite what you thought. And then you have to kind of live with it and see it. And even myself, when I just did my own new home, there were certain things at first I was like, oh wow, fantastic, and then I'd wake up the next morning, which is the day you always get the call from the client saying, not quite sure about this, and I'm like, just wait a couple more days, and then they ring up saying, no, you're absolutely right, it's great. So it's a process of time of getting to know. It's a bit like clothes, you know, you put it on the first time, you feel great, maybe the second time it doesn't quite feel like it should have done. So you just got to get to know your home a bit.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned earlier about the press have been kind to you. I mean, how important has that been in making the business grow, do you think?
I mean, marketing and press is essential. And, you know, I fought with my financial advisor or financial man in my company who's been with me 15 years saying, oh, I don't want to spend money on PR and everything. And finally, he's come around to the fact that you need to do that. You need to show people what you're doing. And the press are very interested in me in more ways than I'd like to say. But it's, you know, it's essential for growing a business. You have to tell people what you're doing, because that's the world we live in. People buy papers and magazines and need to see it. So, you know, you're only as good as, you know, your PR is only as good as you are. You have to give them something. And I'm always thinking of new things and different things to do. So there's always enough. You know, we're launching this month a whole shutter range, which I love, plantation shutters, but I've now brought out a range which are much wider. They look much better. And we've done it through B&Q, but the colours are phenomenal. There's 15 colours, and they're absolutely perfect. And if you order it through B&Q and do your own measurements, it's much cheaper than if you get them to come and, you know, measure up for you. And we've had press on that, and they've just been selling out. So it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to do.
Absolutely. And what about advice to somebody starting up in business? How to create a hopefully successful and thriving business?
Well, you know, I say to a lot of the kids, we do a lot of internships in the studio, and it's very easy after 3 months to see whether somebody's got it or not. I do think that it's hard to set up a business in a recession, but I also think that it's possible. You know, anything's possible. I think if you have a passion and mainly a focus and believe in yourself, you can start a business. You don't have to have a lot of money, because in interior design, you're not running a business properly if you're paying for it. You know, your clients have to give you deposits so that you can, you know, and work it like that. So essentially anyone can start a business, because you can do it from home.
Yep. The other thing that perhaps is interesting about your business is it is so diverse, and yet it is very well edited by you, if you like, you know, well controlled. But I'm not sure people are always aware that, you know, for instance, you're fantastically interested in art and in vintage, as you said, and antiques, as well as a very contemporary look.
Yeah, it's funny, because somebody said to me the other day when they came to my home, they didn't expect it to be like that. I mean, I'm obsessed by vintage. I think that, you know, it's wrong to have a home designed with everything new. You have to have old bits in there. And I think that everything's so accessible today, and it's one of the reasons we're setting up this vintage to order, because I think people don't know where to get things. And essentially, if you want a Corbusier chair and footstool or something, it's possible. You know, there are places that you can get them. It's just that unfortunately people go out into shops and see these ridiculous prices on things, so they think they can't afford it. And so, you know, I'm obsessed with art. My mother and my brother is in photography and art. I've always grown up with it. And so it's important.